I always knew I was second best. My parents never said it outright. They didn't have to. Their actions painted a picture clearer than any words could. My older brother, Marcus, was their pride and joy. 2 years my senior, he could do no wrong. Marcus broke Mom's prized vase once, swinging a baseball bat in the living room. Instead of scolding him, Mom just smiled. "Boys will be boys," she said, her voice dripping with fondness. "At least you're practicing your swing." The unfairness hit me hard a week later. I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet. Mom's reaction? Fury. "Laura, how could you be so careless?" she snapped. "Go get the cleaning supplies right now. And you're grounded for the weekend." Those moments weren't isolated. They were the background noise of my childhood. Marcus brought home mediocre grades, and my parents brushed it off. "He's just focused on football," Dad would say. But when I scored an A- instead of an A+, they barely looked up. "You could do better if you tried harder," Mom muttered. It stung every time. The only solace I found was in my grandmother, Ellen. Her home, just a few blocks away, was my sanctuary. Grandma adored Marcus, but she saw me too, really saw me. She noticed my achievements, cheered me on, and treated me like I mattered. When I won a school art competition, she framed my drawing and hung it in her living room. My parents, meanwhile, didn't even glance at it. Marcus's birthdays were lavish. Bounce houses, dozens of friends, and cakes so elaborate they looked like art. Mine? Half the time, my parents forgot. I'll never forget my 10th birthday. I sat at the breakfast table hopeful, as Mom fussed over Marcus's science project, and Dad hid behind his newspaper. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. "It's my birthday," I said quietly. Dad looked up, surprised. "Oh, right. Happy birthday, kiddo. We'll get you something next time we're at the mall." They never did. Grandma never forgot. She'd show up with a small gift and a homemade cupcake, a single candle flickering atop it. "Make a wish, my dear," she'd say, her voice warm and comforting. In those moments, I felt like I mattered. But then, everything changed. Grandma got sick. I was 14, Marcus 16. Her illness pulled me closer to her. I spent every afternoon at the hospital, doing homework in the uncomfortable chair by her bed. Marcus came by too, though less often. He was busy with football practice. Mom and Dad defended him. "It's important for his future," they said. One evening, a week before she passed, Grandma called the family to her hospital room. Her voice was weak but resolute as she spoke to Dad. "Promise me," she said, gripping his hand. "Promise me you'll use my inheritance for both Laura's and Marcus's education." Dad nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mom. I promise." Her death left a void, but I clung to her promise like a lifeline. I poured myself into my studies, determined to earn my place in college. My report cards were filled with A's, though nobody at home cared. I left them on the kitchen counter, hoping they'd notice. They didn't. Grandma's fridge would have been covered in them, but she wasn't there anymore. In those years, I learned to navigate the silence, the neglect, the unfairness. I built walls, shielding myself from the ache of wanting what my parents wouldn't give: recognition, approval, love. When Marcus graduated, I watched my parents transform our home into a celebration zone. The party was extravagant, with catering and decorations fit for a wedding. Dad clinked his glass during his speech, his voice brimming with pride. "We're so proud of you, son," he said. "And thanks to Grandma's inheritance, we've secured Marcus's future at Preston University." The crowd erupted in applause. I stood in the corner, invisible yet again, holding a plate of cake I didn't eat. They spent Grandma's inheritance on Marcus. All of it. 2 months later, we drove Marcus 6 states away to Preston. Mom and Dad spent days settling him in, taking photos and meeting his dorm mates. When we returned home, the house felt emptier than ever. The silence screamed louder than words. I spent my senior year alone in my room, studying for a future I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to have. The day Marcus left for Preston, our house turned into a shrine for him. Every conversation revolved around his classes, his friends, his football games. Mom and Dad called him daily, sometimes putting him on speaker so his voice could fill the kitchen. They even visited him twice a month, coming back with stories about his life like he was a celebrity. Meanwhile, I was finishing my senior year in silence. I studied harder than ever, poured myself into every test, every project, every competition. Not because I thought anyone would notice, they wouldn't, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was worthy. Graduation day came and went without fanfare. I slipped on my honor cords and white dress alone, drove myself to the ceremony, and sat among classmates whose families filled the bleachers with cheers and flashing cameras. My parents? They were on a much-needed vacation, lounging on a beach somewhere. "We'll bring you back a souvenir," Mom had said, as if missing my graduation was as trivial as skipping a grocery run. Jenny's mom took pictures of me in my cap and gown. "Your parents will love these," she said brightly, not knowing they'd never ask for them. While my classmates celebrated with their families, I went home to an empty house and started working on my college applications. Acceptance letters trickled in over the next few weeks. Evergreen State University offered me a full scholarship, complete with free dorms. Their letter praised my academic achievements and extracurriculars. Then came the acceptance from Blackwood College. It was perfect. The program, the opportunities, everything. But it came with a steep price tag. Not as much as Marcus's tuition at Preston, but still enough to make my stomach churn. I wasn't worried at first. I knew Grandma's inheritance had been meant for both of us. Dad had promised her. I overheard them discussing money often enough to know there was still a portion left. So, I tucked the Blackwood letter in my desk and kept the Evergreen offer as my backup. 2 weeks later, my parents returned, tanned and cheerful. "Marcus is staying on campus this summer," Dad announced proudly. "He's hanging with his brothers." I waited until dinner, when the conversation finally slowed, to bring it up. "I got accepted to Blackwood College," I said, trying to sound casual despite my pounding heart. "Their business program is highly ranked." Mom glanced up briefly from her phone. "That's nice, dear." "I'll need tuition," I added, my voice firmer now. I was hoping we could use my portion of Grandma's inheritance. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Dad put down his coffee mug and exchanged a look with Mom. "We don't have money for your tuition," he said flatly. The words hit like a slap. "What about Grandma's inheritance?" I pressed, my voice shaking. "She made you promise, in front of everyone, that it would go toward both our educations." Mom looked away, uncomfortable, but Dad shrugged like it was no big deal. "We spent it," he said. "On what?" "Our vacation," he said, his tone maddeningly casual, "and the rest went to Marcus. He needed it more." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You promised her," I said, my voice rising. "You promised Grandma, on her deathbed." "I just didn't want to upset her in her final days," Dad said, not even meeting my eyes. "We knew from the start we weren't giving you any of that money." Something inside me snapped. "You're liars," I spat, standing so quickly my chair tipped over. "You betrayed your own mother's dying wish. You stole my future and gave it to Marcus." "Get out," Dad said, his voice ice cold. I blinked. "What?" "You heard your father," Mom said, standing now. "Pack your things. If you're old enough to disrespect us like this, you're old enough to take care of yourself." I wanted to scream, to fight, to demand they see what they were doing. But instead I felt numb. Like a puppet being moved by invisible strings, I packed my suitcase, Mom watching the whole time like I might steal something. Clothes, books, a few pictures of Grandma. Those were all I cared to take. I sent Jenny a single text. "Can I come over? It's important." Her response was immediate. "Of course." Doors open. I left without saying goodbye. Nobody stopped me. Nobody cared. Jenny was waiting at her apartment door when I arrived. She took one look at me and my suitcase and pulled me into a hug. That night, sitting on her couch with a mug of hot chocolate, I made a decision. I would go to Evergreen State. It wasn't Blackwood, but the full scholarship and dorm room were my ticket out. I'd find a way to make it work. I spent that summer at Sunnyside Cafe, saving every penny from my tips while my paychecks covered the bare necessities. I learned how to make lattes, balance trays, and stand on my own 2 feet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. When fall came, I hugged Jenny goodbye and moved into my dorm. My roommate, Sarah, offered to share her mini fridge, and I nearly cried at the simple kindness. By the time classes started, I was ready. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't second best. I was just Laura. College felt like a different world. Evergreen State wasn't Blackwood, but it quickly became my haven. My dorm room, with its cinder-block walls and narrow bed, felt more like home than anywhere else I'd ever lived. Sarah, my roommate, turned out to be kind and easygoing. She didn't ask too many questions, and that suited me just fine. The library became my sanctuary. I got a job shelving books and working the reference desk during evening shifts. The quiet orderliness of it was soothing. Between classes, work, and studying, I barely had time to think about my parents or Marcus. That was for the best. The sting of their betrayal still lingered, but here, it didn't define me. Relatives occasionally called, their questions coated with fake concern. "Are you getting enough to eat, dear?" Aunt Linda would ask. "Do you have somewhere to sleep at night?" Uncle Bob would probe. I answered truthfully, but I couldn't help wondering what stories my parents had told them. I imagined them painting me as a rebellious runaway, too proud to accept their help. It made me sick. Holidays could have been lonely, but Jenny's family wouldn't hear of me spending them alone. That first Christmas, I sat at their dining table, surrounded by warmth and genuine affection. Jenny's dad, Mr. Peterson, pulled me aside after dinner. "I've been watching how hard you work," he said, his voice serious but kind. "When you graduate, there'll be a place for you at Peterson Technologies if you want it." I accepted on the spot, tears threatening to spill over. Finally, someone was acknowledging my effort. Someone believed in me. The years flew by. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of my opportunity. I graduated with honors, and true to his word, Mr. Peterson offered me a position at his company. My first day at Peterson Technologies felt surreal. I walked in wearing a suit I'd bought with savings from my library job. Within 6 months, I was leading my own projects. By the end of my second year, I had a team reporting to me. I didn't just survive, I thrived. Promotions came quickly, and with them, raises that made my old worries about tuition and books seem like a distant memory. For the first time in my life, I wasn't struggling to prove myself. I was building something that was mine. The rewards of my hard work weren't just financial. I started taking yoga classes, treating myself to nice dinners, even traveling with Jenny to places we'd only dreamed of visiting. My birthdays, once forgotten or ignored, became celebrations of achievement. Jenny would organize small gatherings with close friends, and I finally felt what it meant to be surrounded by people who cared. But my parents' absence in my life wasn't entirely voluntary. They called occasionally, their numbers lighting up my phone like unwelcome reminders. I ignored every attempt, unwilling to hear whatever excuses or guilt-laden pleas they had. Jenny sometimes brought up Marcus in passing, updates she'd heard through mutual friends, but I always cut her off. "I don't want to know," I'd say, and she understood. Then came my 27th birthday. I had been saving for 5 years, scraping together every extra penny from bonuses, performance rewards, and even my lunch budget. My dream savings account grew quietly but steadily until it was finally enough. 3 weeks before my birthday, I stood in the empty living room of a beautiful apartment, the hardwood floors gleaming in the sunlight. It was mine, not rented, but owned. The realtor handed me the keys with a smile. "Congratulations," she said. "It's all yours." That evening, feeling bold, I did something I rarely did. I posted on social media. It was just me, standing in my empty living room with the keys dangling from my fingers. The caption read, "Early birthday gift to myself." Dreams do come true when you work hard enough. The likes and comments flooded in. Jenny was first, of course, with a gleeful, "Finally. Can't wait for the housewarming party." My colleagues chimed in with congratulations, and even some relatives I hadn't heard from in years liked the post. Then came the call. I was sitting at my desk at work, reviewing quarterly reports, when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it instantly. Irene, sweetheart. My mother's voice was sticky sweet, a tone I hadn't heard in years. I saw your beautiful new apartment on Facebook. And your birthday's coming up, isn't it? The irony made me laugh bitterly. Suddenly remembered, did you? It's just so wonderful to see you doing so well, she continued, ignoring my tone. Your father and I have been talking, and we think it's time to celebrate properly. A big family dinner. At home. What do you say? I almost laughed again. Years of silence, years of being invisible. And now that I had something to show for myself, suddenly they cared. Against my better judgment, I heard myself saying, "Sure, Mom, why not?" As I hung up, I couldn't help but smile, though there was no warmth in it. Whatever game they were playing, I was curious to see how it would unfold. The day of the dinner arrived faster than I expected. I pulled up to my parents' house in my new Mercedes, the engine purring softly as I parked. It was the first time I'd been back in almost a decade, and the house looked worse than I remembered. The paint was peeling, the shingles were missing, and the lawn was wild with weeds. As I stepped out, Mom and Dad appeared in the doorway. Their eyes immediately darted to my car, then to my designer suit and heels. Mom's face lit up with exaggerated enthusiasm as she rushed forward to hug me. "Irene, you look expensive," she said, her voice overly bright. Dad hung back, trying to appear casual, but failing miserably. They looked older, more gray hair, deeper wrinkles, slightly stooped shoulders, but the calculating gleam in their eyes hadn't aged a day. Inside, the house was worse. The furniture was threadbare, the carpets nearly bald, and there, sprawled on the same couch from my childhood, was Marcus. He'd gained weight, lost hair, and looked every bit as aimless as I remembered. Beside him sat a young woman with a pregnant belly that strained against her dress. "Hey sis," Marcus said, barely glancing up. "Meet Sarah, my wife." Mom quickly jumped in with an explanation I hadn't asked for. "Marcus and Sarah are staying with us temporarily," she said, the word stretched to its breaking point. "College wasn't quite the right fit for him, but he's got some promising job prospects." 9 years of temporary, I thought, but kept my face neutral. Dad clapped his hands together, his tone overly cheerful. "The guests will be here soon, but first, tell us about your job. That car of yours," he added, gesturing toward the window. "Must mean you're doing pretty well." "Things were fine," I replied vaguely, steering the conversation away. Mom wasn't so subtle. "What exactly do you do? That apartment of yours must cost a fortune." "I work in management," I said simply, sidestepping the question again. "How's everyone been?" The doorbell saved me from further interrogation. Relatives poured in, hugging me like we'd always been close, asking questions as if they genuinely cared. Aunt Helen pulled me aside, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I'm so glad you came to your senses, dear. Your parents were so worried about you after you ran away." My stomach tightened. "Ran away?" I repeated, feigning confusion. She nodded solemnly. "Living on the streets, refusing to work. It must have been hard. But look at you now, all cleaned up and respectable." The pieces clicked. While I'd been clawing my way toward success, my parents had spun tales of a wayward, rebellious daughter. They were the noble, heartbroken parents who'd never given up hope. By the time we sat down for dinner, my patience was razor thin. Dad stood to make a toast, his voice thick with faux emotion. "We're here to celebrate Irene," he announced. "We're so proud of everything she's become." Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, the same practiced tears she used in community theater years ago. "Family should stick together," she added, reaching for my hand. "That's what matters most. Supporting each other." The emphasis on supporting wasn't subtle. Neither was the way her eyes flicked to my watch or the bracelet on my wrist. I let the silence stretch after she finished, then slowly stood. "Thank you. I said, my voice steady. It's interesting that you remembered my birthday this year. A first, really. The room grew quiet. Mom's tears dried up instantly. You know, growing up, my birthdays were different. They were forgotten more often than not. But I suppose an apartment in a nice part of town and a Mercedes make birthdays more memorable, don't they? Irene, Dad warned, his tone low. This isn't the time. Oh, but it is, I said, turning to the room. Aunt Helen told me something interesting earlier. Apparently, I ran away at 18, became homeless, and refused to work. I'd love to hear more about this mysterious runaway phase of mine. Mom? Dad, care to elaborate? Mom's voice was high and nervous. Sweetheart, the past is the past. Let's not. The truth, I interrupted, raising my voice just enough to cut her off, is that they kicked me out the day after my high school graduation. Want to know why? A few relatives nodded hesitantly. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It's because I reminded them of the promise they made to Grandma, the one where they swore, to use her inheritance for both Marcus's and my college educations. Instead, they spent my portion on a luxury vacation and gave the rest to Marcus. When I dared to question them, they threw me out. That's not true, Mom protested weakly, but I could see the recognition in the eyes around the table. I got into college on my own merits, I continued, worked my way through it, built my career from nothing, and in 9 years they never called, never remembered my birthday until they saw my new apartment on Facebook. The silence was deafening. Aunt Helen looked at my parents with open disgust. Uncle Bob shook his head slowly, muttering something under his breath. I picked up my purse, my voice calm. I didn't come here for a reconciliation. I came to set the record straight. Enjoy the dinner. As I walked out, the weight I'd carried for years finally lifted. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the engine. My mind replayed the scene at my parents' house on a loop. The silence, the shifting gazes, the way Mom's crocodile tears dried up when faced with the truth. For years, I'd wondered if they'd ever regret their choices. Tonight, I got my answer. Probably not, but I didn't care anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt free. When I arrived home, the apartment was exactly as I'd left it, bright, modern, and completely mine. A catered dinner sat waiting in the fridge, and the living room was already set up for the party I knew I'd prefer. Jenny arrived first, as she always did, carrying a bottle of wine and a cake she had insisted on baking herself. "You're glowing," she said, hugging me as soon as I opened the door. "How'd it go?" "Better than I thought," I said, laughing softly. "And exactly how I expected." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "Meaning, I told the truth, set the record straight, and left. No dramatics, just facts." Jenny smirked. "So, no family reconciliation arc?" "Not this time," I replied, grinning. Soon, the apartment filled with the people who mattered, friends, colleagues, and the makeshift family I'd built for myself. We laughed, ate, and toasted to birthdays and milestones. For the first time, my birthday wasn't a reminder of what I lacked, but a celebration of what I'd achieved. As the evening wound down, I sat on the couch with Jenny, the glow of city lights streaming through the windows. "I did it," I said, almost to myself. "You've been doing it," she replied, nudging me. "This is just the next chapter." The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Missed calls, voicemails, and messages poured in, all from my parents. The tone shifted from apologetic to angry to pleading. "Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you, sweetheart. Let's talk." "Dad, that wasn't the place to air grievances, Irene. Let's handle this privately." "Marcus, hey sis, could really use some help with a little situation here. Call me back when you can." I deleted the messages without responding. The same people who ignored me for years suddenly wanted back in, now that they saw the life I'd built. It wasn't guilt driving them, it was opportunity. And I wasn't about to let them exploit me again. At work, I poured myself into my projects with a renewed sense of purpose. My team had a major deadline approaching, and I was determined to deliver. Leading a group of talented, motivated people felt like redemption, a reminder that I had earned every bit of success on my own terms. A week later, Aunt Helen reached out. Her text was polite, but direct. "I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. I had no idea what you went through. If you ever need anything, I'm here." Her words were kind, but they didn't erase the years of silence from the rest of my family. Still, I appreciated the sentiment. I replied with a simple, "Thank you," and left it at that. As the weeks passed, the weight of my confrontation with my parents began to fade. It didn't consume me like it might have before. Instead, I felt lighter, more focused on the future than the past. Jenny and I started planning a trip, a dream vacation to Greece, a destination we'd always talked about. "You deserve this," she said as we booked the flights. And for once, I believed her. One evening, as I sat in my living room flipping through travel guides, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't family. It was an old classmate, someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. "Hey Laura, just saw your post about the apartment. You're killing it. Let's catch up sometime." It made me pause. For so long, I'd felt invisible, unseen by the people who should have cared. Now, I wasn't just visible. I was thriving, and the world was starting to notice. But I didn't need their validation anymore. My success wasn't for them. It was for me, for the girl who'd once sat alone on her birthday, waiting for someone to remember, for the teenager who'd packed her life into a suitcase and walked out of the only home she'd ever known, for the woman who'd built a life worth celebrating, one small step at a time. As I closed the travel guide and looked out at the city lights, I smiled to myself. The best part about leaving the past behind wasn't just escaping the hurt. It was realizing that my future was entirely my own. Life has a funny way of moving forward when you stop holding on to the past. The fallout from that dinner at my parents' house had faded into a distant memory. I'd blocked their numbers, ignored their messages, and carved out a life that didn't revolve around their approval, or lack thereof. Greece with Jenny turned out to be everything we'd dreamed of and more. We wandered ancient ruins, swam in crystal-clear waters, and ate meals that tasted like joy itself. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I had to prove or who I needed to impress. I was just living. When we got back, I threw myself back into work. My team at Peterson Technologies had landed a major project, and I was determined to make it a success. Late nights at the office didn't feel draining. They felt invigorating. Every meeting, every problem solved, every milestone hit reminded me that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, Mr. Peterson stopped by my office. "You've done impressive work this year, Laura," he said, his tone warm. "I'm promoting you to Senior Project Manager. The official announcement will go out tomorrow." I was stunned. "Thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've earned it," he replied. Driving home that night, I thought about how far I'd come. The scared 18-year-old who packed her life into a suitcase felt like a different person entirely, but she was still there, buried beneath layers of resilience and hard-won confidence, reminding me why I'd fought so hard to succeed. That weekend, Jenny insisted on celebrating my promotion. She invited our closest friends over, and we spent the night toasting to new beginnings. "You're unstoppable," she said, clinking her glass against mine. I smiled. I just had a lot of practice being resilient. The next few months passed in a blur of work, friends, and quiet contentment. I started volunteering at a local mentorship program, helping young women navigate their own challenges. Seeing their determination reminded me of the path I'd walked and how grateful I was to be on the other side of it. Then, one day, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. My mother's. I debated throwing it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dear Laura, we've been thinking about you a lot lately. We're so proud of everything you've accomplished. Your father and I miss you terribly and want to make amends. Please come home. Let's talk. Love, Mom." The words felt hollow, like an echo of every apology they'd never truly meant. I folded the letter and tucked it away in a drawer, unsure if I'd ever respond. By then, I knew I didn't need their closure. I didn't need their validation. I'd built a life without them, and it was full of achievements, of people who cared, of moments that were entirely mine. For my 30th birthday, I threw a party in my apartment, inviting everyone who'd been part of my journey. Jenny, my co-workers, my mentees, and even Mr. Peterson showed up. As I looked around the room that night, I felt a surge of gratitude. The life I'd created wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was built on hard work, resilience, and the quiet decision to keep going, even when it felt like the world was against me. At the end of the night, Jenny pulled me aside. "You've come so far, you know that?" she said, her voice soft. I nodded. "I do." And I meant it. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably still telling their version of the story, still trying to paint themselves as the victims. But it didn't matter anymore. Their story wasn't mine to tell, and their lies couldn't touch the truth I'd lived. Standing in my apartment that night, surrounded by people who truly saw me, I realized something. My worth had never been tied to them. It had always been my own. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And this time, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about finally believing it for myself. Story 2. I'm Ella, and I can't recall the precise moment I recognized that I wasn't like my sister Sarah. Perhaps it was when she was 4 and I was 7. As I assisted Mom with dinner, I saw her play with dolls. Or maybe it was all the days I spent looking out our kitchen window at the other children playing outside as I washed dishes that were nearly out of my reach. "Ela, the homework is finished." Every day after school, Mom would inquire. She spoke in a harsh, expectant tone. "Yes, Mom," I would respond right away while putting on the 2 large aprons she had purchased for me on my 6th birthday. A useful present. She had made the call. "Excellent. Now assist me with dinner. You may go play, Sarah, my dear." As I stood on my tiptoes to get to the counter, Sarah would bounce and skip off her black bunches. I knew better than to whine, even at 7. Whenever I tried, she would still remark, "Little Mum, the big sister is you. You must lend a hand." Dad was no exception. He would brush Sarah's hair when he got home from work, and she would show him her most recent sketch, which she normally did for school. Then gave me an all too familiar look. "Ella, how are your grades today? Not what did you learn, or how was your day?" Only grades. Grades are always given. I would say, "All A's, Dad," and he would nod as if it were the very least he required. Because it was. Our home was little. A basic middle-class 2-story building. I hardly ever saw my pals outside of school, even though they lived close by. Something has to be done all the time. Laundry and dishes. Assisting Sarah with her assignments despite the fact that she seldom ever focused or studied to keep her marks at a flawless score. I recall a certain afternoon when I was 10 years old. My instructor congratulated me when I earned first place in the regional maths competition, and my parents were overjoyed. "Mrs. Peterson said, 'You've raised Ella so wonderfully. She has a remarkable passion for studying.'" Mom and Dad looked at each other with pride. "We've always urged her to read, though." With her hand on my shoulder, Mom spoke. "Ella, haven't we?" Since daylight was for duties, I wanted to be honest with Mrs. Peterson about why I had remained up late studying by torch, that the possibility of disappointment was the only thing that gave me encouragement. If I didn't bring anything flawless home. However, I simply nodded and grinned like the obedient daughter I should have been. In the meantime, no one spoke about Sarah's failed maths test, which she was using to make paper aeroplanes in the corridor. In our home, things were always that way. Sarah would occasionally be seen grinning at me, especially when she got away with something that would have gotten me a scolding. She told me once, when I was 12 and she was 9, that "You're simply envious because my parents like me." I recall standing in our shared bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror while my hand was still wet from wiping it. "I just cleared the streak," I responded. "That's not true." Even yet, I couldn't help but wonder if it would have been by the time Sarah entered middle school. In a sense, I served as her private tutor, by parental order, not by choice. She would text beneath the table as I sat with her at the kitchen table every afternoon, attempting to explain simple arithmetic. "I want you to listen, Sarah. After my own school day and housework, I would say that I'm fatigued. Why? In the end, you'll just do it for me." She would respond with her grating grin. She was also correct. That's precisely what would occur. "Why hasn't Sarah finished her homework yet, Ella?" Mom would always inquire. Her hands were on her hips. "She isn't paying attention. Then get her to concentrate. You should be assisting her." It was simpler for me to finish Sarah's homework while she watched YouTube videos than to cope with Mom's dissatisfaction. Sarah's weekly stipend, meanwhile, would show up every Friday like clockwork, $20. Me? When I received $5 a month, I considered myself fortunate, typically accompanied by a lecture about how money doesn't grow on trees. My 16th birthday was the tipping point. While I was wearing hand-me-downs and couldn't even afford to buy lunch at school, I was sick of seeing Sarah show off her new clothing and the newest technology. At Joe's Cafe, which is only 3 blocks from our house, I noticed the help wanted sign at that moment. I was immediately recruited by Joe, a stern but sympathetic man who had given me innumerable hot chocolates over the years. Waiting tables, cleaning up messes, and interacting with irate patrons were all difficult tasks. It was mine, though. In my life, for the first time. I was making money on my own. I felt liberated when I received my first paycheck. A month's worth of part-time labor costs $850. I should have realized that leaving it on my desk was a bad idea. Ella. That night, Mom's words echoed throughout the home. "Now come down here." In the kitchen, they were both waiting. Between them, my paycheck was on the table. Dad walked out harsh. Mom was let down. Expressions I was all too familiar with. "Why didn't you disclose your income to us?" Dad insisted. "I recently received my paycheck," I stumbled. "Well, you'll be giving us half of this since you live here and consume our meals," Mom said. "It's just..." Not even having to give up half of my salary was the toughest part. That was the next step. Sarah wore brand new Nike trainers and waltzed into our room a week later. "Take a look at what your parents purchased for me." She spun around while singing. Yes, there is a purpose to all that waitressing. I sobbed that night while cooped up in the bathroom. However, I also made my choice at that time. College was my passport to freedom, and I was leaving this place. It would never be paid for by my parents. Every time they discussed how Sarah would eventually need money for college, they made that point very evident. So, with newfound vigor, I threw myself into my studies. I began staying after school to use the computers in the library to look into free tuition and scholarship opportunities. I used every free moment to write essays, prepare for the SATs, and keep my GPA flawless. My parents' performance on The Perfect Family was exactly what I expected it to be on graduation day. Principal Roberts called me up as valedictorian, and I sat through the ceremony in my blue gown and cap, watching them beam from the audience. He told the audience that the Matthews had raised Ella in a remarkable way. Her scholastic accomplishments are absolutely astounding. While Dad stood tall and proudly puffed out his chest, Mom wiped at her eyes with a tissue. As usual, I could see them soaking up the accolades. As other parents complimented them on their excellent parenting, they nodded and grinned. None of them were aware that every college I had applied to had already sent me acceptance letters. For weeks, I've been diligently checking the mailbox to catch the letters before anyone else does. Every congrats felt like a key to a door I had spent my entire life trying to open. However, Riverside State University produced the best one, the one I had selected. A stipend, free dorm housing, and a full scholarship are provided. The next state was 4 hours away. It was so far away that I was unable to assist on the weekends by returning home. I still hadn't told them. I was waiting for the right moment, which came sooner than I expected. At our graduation dinner, Mom had made my favorite pasta, or what she thought was my favorite. She'd never actually asked, and we were all sitting around the dining room table. "So, Ella," Mom said, serving herself another helping, "have you thought about what you're going to do now?" I opened my mouth to tell them about Riverside, but before I could get a word out, Mom continued with a bright smile. "I was talking to Joe at the cafe yesterday. He said he'd be happy to take you on full-time. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You might earn so much more and really help out with the household costs. I took a big breath. I was admitted to college, full scholarship at Riverside State. I'm beginning in the fall. The ensuing hush was deafening. Mom's dish clattered as her fork struck it. Dad's face became an awful shade of crimson. University. Mom's voice sounded piercing in another state. But what about your family? What about assisting your sister? I've been assisting my sister her entire life. I responded gently, this is something I need to do for myself. Dad sprang up so abruptly, his chair scratched against the floor. Without a word, he strode out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Now see what you've done, Mom hissed. Sarah simply sat there grinning a little, most likely already planning how to obtain my room. When I departed, it was like living with ghosts at home that past summer. I would go to the cafe to work, return home, give me half of my paycheck, and then hide in my room. My parents hardly ever spoke to me. I just gave a call, necessary conversations around dinner times or expenses. They received the money they deducted from my paychecks without expressing gratitude. I packed my stuff by myself when August arrived. No family pictures on the front porch, no heartfelt farewells. I observed other students packing their cars, but no dad did it. It was only myself, my 2 bags, and my Riverside State bus ticket. I'm going now. That morning, I made an announcement. Mom continued to wash dishes and bring them back to me while she stood at the doorway of the kitchen. Dad's newspaper rustled. Sarah remained glued to her phone. Mom answered, "All right," as if I had informed her I was heading to the grocery store. Every mile of the 4-hour bus trip to college was an absolute relief. I felt more liberated, lighter. Jenny, my roommate, became the sister I'd always wanted in my little but tidy dorm room. Encouraging. Nice. Curious about my life. I immersed myself into my financial studies and thoroughly enjoyed learning about market research and investing methods. My work ethic was commended by my lecturers, and for once, no one was available to claim credit. There was a consistent pattern to the infrequent calls home. Mom might remark that Sarah is considering a career as a model, not inquiring about my well-being. All she has to do is wait for the ideal moment. Dad would continue, disregarding my efforts to highlight my own accomplishments from my junior year. Sarah received her high school diploma, not because they wanted me at the ceremony, but because Mom personally phoned to inform me about it. Sarah is taking a while to come to terms with the situation, Mom clarified. We urged her not to worry about the fact that her grades weren't nearly college level. The suitable position will present itself. I reflected on how they had forced me to work when I was 16, how they would keep half of my money, and how they had thwarted my plans to attend college. Meanwhile, what is she doing? Mom answered breezily. Oh, just exploring her options. When I questioned, she shouldn't jump into anything she isn't enthusiastic about. I received honors when I graduated. The dean's list has my name at the top. At my graduation, Jimmy's family applauded me, since mine didn't arrive. I returned to my hometown 2 weeks later and began working at Reynolds & Associates as a junior financial analyst. My initial pay was greater than the combined income of my parents. I felt like I could finally breathe when I was able to buy my own flat for the first time. But the dinner invitation began as soon as people learnt about my employment. For yourself, you must be doing well, Dad would comment, observing my business attire. Mom would say, "We're so proud," before telling another tale about Sarah's most recent modeling or employment interview. At these dinners, Sarah would sit across from me, still glued to her phone, still waiting for the perfect moment at the age of 19. In some way, it was okay that she had never worked in her life. They stared expectantly at me and gave me clues regarding household maintenance and debts. There has been a significant increase in property taxes. It's difficult to make ends meet these days, as Mom would say. Dad would also contribute. I began giving them money as a result. This is $500. There, $1,000. However, they continued to provide me clues, and with every payment I made, their expectations increased. They appeared to expect more the more I contributed. As if I were atoning for the crime of abandoning my own life in a structure I made the error of telling Mom about my promotion to senior financial analyst on our weekly conversation. She had organized a celebratory meal at their home in a matter of hours. "Honey, you have our utmost admiration," Mom remarked, but there was that tone in her voice. I was too familiar. "Given how tough things have been here, it's fantastic that you're doing so well." Just as expected, Dad let out a deep sigh. "The business is cutting again," Mom said, removing a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "They've cut these bills in my hours." Tears were already forming in her eyes. How we're going to handle the utilities this month is just a mystery to me. I looked at Sarah, who was wearing expensive pants that I knew her parents couldn't afford, and was still engrossed in her phone. I intended to make the point that a 22-year-old who can dedicate hours to creating dancing videos could likely manage a few job applications. I choked down the words that were on the tip of my tongue. Then Mom revealed the truth. She patted my hand across the table and said, "You know, Ella, we have been considering. You're spending a lot of money on your flat. How about returning home? We could support one another and you could save money." As I saw my hard-earned money go into their wallets, I felt like I was 16 all over again. The idea of giving up my space, my freedom, and my quiet flat. My stomach turned over. However, as I was about to say no, I noticed the familiar guilty expressions on their faces. I heard myself say, "I'm okay," and saw their happy faces light up. I returned to my childhood bedroom a week later. Perhaps I had simply gotten too large for the space, or it felt smaller than I recalled. I promptly outlined my terms. "I won't be cooking or cleaning, but I will assist with the shopping and payments. Growing up, I did plenty of it." Mom instantly agreed. Too soon. Really? I didn't realize why until the next day when I heard Sarah's irate scream. "I have to clean." "What do you mean?" She let out a cry. "I have no idea how to use the Hoover," Mom remarked. "Well, it's time you learnt," in a much kinder tone than she had ever used while discussing duties with me. "To allow you to assist with the house, Ella is providing financial support." The Hoover hardly touched the carpet as Sarah stomped around, moaning to herself that it was all unjust, as I observed from my doorway. Later, she would share passive-aggressive stories about unjust treatment and forced labor on Instagram, but I couldn't bring myself to care. After all, she continued to live off of my income, which inexplicably never appeared to ease our parents' financial burden. This included my rent equivalent, grocery payments, and utility contributions. Learning how to clean a bathroom was the least she could do. "Ella, have you observed the house's deteriorating appearance?" One morning over coffee, Mom commented in passing. "The living room's wallpaper and paint are also flaking." Dad instantly joined in. "Additionally, the bathroom fixtures are somewhat antiquated. Giving this property a makeover would be good." I anticipated what would happen. After a few suggestions and 3 days, they formally requested if I might assist with some house renovations. Naturally, they intended to pay for everything when they said assistance. In the end, I spent around $30,000 on repairs and improvements, new paint for the entire property, new wallpaper in every room, new bathroom fixtures, new kitchen equipment and hardwood floors to replace the old carpet. I even had the yard manicured and the exterior painted. The change was striking. I had to concede that the house looked like it belonged in a home renovation magazine, and all of a sudden, it became the family's gathering place. "See what we've done to the place. You have to come," Mom would say to friends and family over the phone. "We've made such amazing progress. We always are." As people complimented their lovely home and taste, I would sit silently and observe with pleasure as my parents were lauded. They never once brought up the fact that I had paid for the complete makeover. They never once admitted that my financial account was the source of their better living. They organized their largest gathering to date as Christmas drew near. Mom invited all of their acquaintances, as well as any relative who lived within driving distance. "It will be ideal," she insisted. "We'll show everyone how great we're doing." I lavished a lot of money on presents for everyone, including a brand new laptop for Sarah, which she had been teasing for months. When Christmas Day finally arrived, the home was crowded with visitors who were enjoying the catered meal that I had also paid for and ogling the improvements. When it was time to give and receive presents, I watched as Sarah opened our parents' brand new iPhone, along with all of its attachments. You might certainly hear her squealing with joy next door. They gave me a drugstore bath set as a present, the type you purchase at the last minute when you forget someone. I remained silent. I just thanked them and grinned before observing as everyone unwrapped their pricey presents. I purchased them. The discrepancy went unnoticed. It didn't seem like anyone cared. Mom cleared her throat to announce something as the celebration was coming to an end. She pointed to her out-of-state acquaintance and added, "Linda and her kids are staying with us for a few days." Linda grinned broadly. After the lengthy travel, her 2 teenage daughters appear exhausted. "That's good," I said, already seeing how claustrophobic the living room would be if 3 people slept there. Mom wasn't done, though. "You'll have to get your belongings out of your room, Ella." There, Linda and the children will remain. Still digesting what I had just heard, I stood in the center of the living room. Linda and her children moved uneasily, sensing the strain clearly. I tried to speak at a reasonable voice and advised that they remain in the living room. "We can bring in the air mattress and put up the pull-out sofa." Mom snapped at their guests, "So stop being so dumb. The living room is not a suitable place for them to sleep. There, they will feel uneasy." I was struck with the irony of her concern for their comfort. "What about my comfort?" My cheeks began to flush as I asked, "Have you given that any thought?" Dad dismissively waved his hand. "Quit creating a fuss. Simply gather your belongings and proceed to the living room. Only a few days will pass." I surveyed the house I had remodeled, the Christmas decor I had purchased, and the gifts I had purchased. Something broke inside of me. Why are they unable to remain in Sarah's room? The ensuing hush was deafening. Sarah's new iPhone caused her head to pop up. Her jaw was agape. As I had indicated, Mom and Dad exchanged glances, igniting the home. "It's unbelievable that you would even imply that," Sarah muttered. "That's absolutely not possible," Mom stated firmly. "Why? Why is it okay to move me but not her?" I pressed. Mom's face flushed. She said, "You're making me look foolish in front of my friend. We didn't raise you to be like this." Dad thundered, "Maybe you shouldn't be here at all if you can't treat this house with the respect it deserves." "Leave now," Mom added in a high-pitched voice. "Leave till you can behave yourself." I gave them a look, observed them closely. At Sarah's smug little smirk, at Dad's scarlet face, at Mom's self-righteous rage. I paid for the food on their table, the presents under their tree, and the house over their heads, yet none of them appeared to remember or care. They weren't reminded by me. I went to my room upstairs instead. They intended to give away the place as if it were their own. As I packed my luggage and called hotels and hostels to see if there were any openings on Christmas night, my hands remained firm. There was just one room remaining at the Paradise, a little hostel on the outskirts of town. I made the reservation right away. After 20 minutes, I descended those exquisite mahogany steps. My baggage was carried for a fee. No one made an effort to stop me. No one spoke. Sarah simply grinned and resumed using her new iPhone. There wasn't much in the Paradise. Despite having a restroom down the hall and a small room with a lumpy bed, it felt more like home than my parents' house has in years. I went there by myself on New Year's Eve with my laptop and some Chinese takeaway to look for a flat. I located a 1-bedroom flat in a contemporary building across town, a long way from the area where my parents lived. My phone was buzzing all the time. My parents and Sarah texted and called me throughout those initial days. None of them were read or answered by me. I painted the walls the colors I wanted and purchased furnishings that I truly loved, not merely what my parents would approve of. Established an area that was all mine. Finally, 2 weeks after I moved in, my mother surprised me. I would never make the same mistake again. I answered my phone without first looking at the caller ID. She said without introduction that the utility payments were due. Her tone became abrasive and demanding. "You can return now that Linda and her children have left. Your room is ready for you." The ridiculousness of that nearly made me chuckle. "Mel." "Hi, Mel. Sorry. One more request." "No," I answered softly. "No. What do you mean?" She seemed truly perplexed, as though she had never considered the prospect of my rejection. "No, Mom, I'm not returning, and I'm no longer going to pay your debts." A moment of startled quiet fell. Then there was the blast. I had anticipated it. "You dare!" she screamed. "This is how you pay us back for everything we've done for you? When we need you, by leaving your family behind." I listened to her tirade for a while, hearing the same old accusations and guilt trips. They stopped touching me. "You expressed your true feelings for me rather clearly." When she stopped to get her breath, I remarked, "You've demonstrated to me that I am only a checkbook. That checkbook is now closed. Please don't call me again until you're prepared to show me respect." Before she could answer, I hung up. The texts and calls increased in volume. Dad then left voicemails regarding his family's responsibilities. Sarah used deceptive messaging to claim that my selfishness was causing her pain. Mom went through phases of anger and emotional guilt trips. They were all blocked by me. Months came after weeks. I pushed myself into my career, got promoted again, and began going to yoga sessions with people we had in common. I was informed about the events at my parents' residence. For the first time in years, they were having trouble paying their expenses. The type of unglamorous labor that Sarah had always detested, working as a cashier at the neighborhood grocery, had become her only option. She was reportedly awful at it, as seen by her many sick leave requests and complaints about having to stand all day. Their parents were telling everyone they could about their ungrateful oldest daughter, who had left them when they needed her most. They had spoken long stories about all they had given up for my schooling, but nothing. How they had helped me in my profession, how I had deceived them, and how they hadn't. As soon as I succeeded, they were believed by some. Permit them. In actuality, I had been the person they wanted me to be for 25 years. The family ATM, the responsible one, the obedient daughter. I needed to be myself now. The irony is that I now genuinely appreciate them. For that final Christmas night when they went too far, not for the years of control and manipulation. To discover who you are, sometimes you have to lose everything. Story 3. I'm Chloe, and my parents split when I was 14 years old. It wasn't the kind of split that you see in movies. No hurling clothing out of windows or yelling contests. Only two individuals realized they could no longer make it work. Mom began dating again very soon after Dad relocated many states away. Richard came into our life in this way. At first, Richard appeared to be a decent person. He made my mother laugh, wore nice clothes, and had a decent position at some major corporation. However, there was something unsettling about the way he gazed at me. Right from the start, not in a spooky manner, worse in a critical sense, as if I were some sort of issue that required his attention. Your daughter needs some direction. About a month after he moved in, one evening, I heard him telling his mother, "She's at that challenging age." Mom's response made my stomach turn as I was standing in the hallway. "I am aware. I'm really happy you're available to assist." However, it didn't help. With a smile that never quite made it to his eyes, it was criticism cloaked in phony care. Little remarks regarding my hair or attire were made at first, then everything got out of hand. I recall the first time he truly affected me. About 6 months after he and his mother were married, it happened over dinner. I was dressed in brand new pants that I had purchased with my allowance. "Chloe, those jeans are starting to fit you a little snug." Halfway to his lips, Richard paused his fork and spoke, "You're developing so quickly." Then he said something loud enough for me to hear, primarily. Tears were on the verge of streaming down my face. "This is how they should fit." I was able to say, "Oh, sweetheart, Mom got right in. Richard is just worried about your well-being. Teenagers sometimes fail to notice these things, do you know?" That was the trend. When Richard would say something hurtful under the pretext of care, Mom would support him. She would shake her head and claim I was being overly sensitive each time I attempted to express how his remarks affected me. "Chloe, you have to learn to take a joke." She would say that while Richard sat there grinning smugly. "All he's doing is attempting to protect you." After that, I called my dad more frequently. I was saved by our Skype conversations. Without attempting to justify Richard's actions or claiming that I was exaggerating, he would actually listen to me. He continued to make monthly alimony payments, which I eventually found to be more than adequate. However, the situation at home could not be resolved by money. With the birth of my half-brother, everything changed. At the age of 17, I was attempting to concentrate on my senior year of high school, while our home became a monument to Richard's ideal little family. Except for me, of course. Mom was very engrossed on the infant. I understand. He was little, adorable, and in need of continual care, but I seemed to have vanished into thin air overnight. Only until something went wrong did nobody appear to notice me. Like the time I shut my bedroom door too loudly and unintentionally awakened the baby. After the kid was born, I thought Richard would get even worse and find more reasons to be critical of me. However, an unforeseen event occurred. He began to travel frequently for work. My redemption came from those business travels. When he was gone, the house felt lighter, as if I could breathe again. Mom even appeared more at ease. My senior year went better than I had anticipated, despite the fact that she was constantly counting down the days until his return because Richard was away so much. I joined the yearbook committee, concentrated on my studies, and began planning for college. Actual plans, not just escape fantasies. Dad kept his word and showed up on graduation day. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, he was sitting in the audience, grinning proudly. Mom was also present, Richard and the baby, of course. However, I searched the crowd for my father's face. My father took me aside after the ceremony. "Chloe, I meant what I said earlier." With his hands on my shoulders, he told me, "You can attend any college you like. I'll see it through. You deserve it." In the hopes that at least one college would accept me, I had already applied to a number of them. They all did, which surprised me. However, I was certain of the one I desired, the one in the city of Dad. I would not have to return home frequently because it was far away. However, close enough to someone who genuinely looked out for me. I didn't tell Mom and Richard until after dinner. The table was where we were seated. Richard complained about the airline food from his most recent trip, while Mom fed my brother. Every college I applied to accepted me. During a brief period of silence, I said, "I'm going to take Marshall University's offer." In midair, Mom passed the baby spoon. That's where your father lives, isn't it?" I nodded, ready myself for their reaction. "Well," Richard murmured, that same mocking smirk creeping across his face. "Looks like your father finally got to accomplish something meaningful with his life, paying for education. Who would have thought?" I grabbed my fork so hard my knuckles became white. The impulse to lash back at him, to tell him just what I felt of his beneficial addition to my life, was almost overwhelming. But I restrained my tongue. I didn't want to give him the gratification of watching me lose my calm. Mom breathed out a little sigh of what sounded disturbingly like relief. Maybe she was delighted to finally have me out of the way, free to focus on her actual family without the difficult residue of her prior marriage lingering about. The next morning, I packed all I could fit into 2 bags and a backpack. Mom was too occupied with the baby to see me carrying my stuff downstairs, and Richard had already left for work. Dad arranged for a car service to bring me up, and by that evening, I was standing in front of his house, a lovely 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch. It was so different from the small place I had left behind, but it wasn't simply the magnitude that hit me, it was the warmth. Dad was waiting at the door with his fiancée, Sarah. I had not anticipated her. She had vivid red hair, paint, and clothes that were soiled, and she was younger than her mother. She hugged me tightly as if we had been pals for ages. She grabbed one of my suitcases and said, "We have your room ready." I may have gone a little too far with the decorations if that's okay with you. The space was ideal. It had a window seat that looked out onto the backyard and was serene and elegant. "Mel," I'm weeping. Criticism from Mel Richard. Mel is being cautious. Just tranquilly. That evening, after seeing my note, Mom called. She seemed offended and replied, "You could have said goodbye properly. All day long your brother searched for you. He's too motherly. He won't remember my presence." Soon enough. During those initial weeks, I adjusted to my new existence, learning more about Sarah. She had a knack of making everyone feel at ease while teaching art at the nearby high school. We would speak about everything and nothing, while occasionally sipping hot chocolate late into the night. Dad offered to help me out totally, but I wanted to be on my own. The daily grind, a bustling cafe close to the house, is where I got a job. Although it wasn't a glamorous job, I liked it. My teammates were entertaining. The usual clients were kind, and the tips were reasonable. I moved into Marshall University's dormitories in the autumn. Jenny, my roommate, was a Chicago music major who often brought me coffee and studied violin at strange hours. I was studying business administration and was enjoying my lessons when she returned from her early morning rehearsals. I worked at the cafe in between lectures and study sessions. This was how a year went by, and I was content, very content, until a typical Tuesday afternoon at the cafe turned everything upside down. My stomach dropped when I heard a familiar laugh when I was cleaning tables. Richard was seated at a corner table, but he was not alone himself, and he was most certainly not traveling for work. They were kissing like first-dating teens, and he was with a lady I had never seen before. "Lisa? Hello." I tried not to shake my voice as I whispered to my coworker, "Could you please take table 12? I must go take a rest." With my pulse racing through the little window in the door, I ducked into the rear room. They were still visible to me. As I took out my phone and began recording, my hands were shaking. Looking at her the way he used to stare at his mother in the early days, Richard was now grasping the woman's hand across the table. When they eventually departed, I was still lurking in the rear when Lisa discovered me. What was the purpose of that? With a worried expression, she questioned, "Were those individuals familiar to you?" "The guy?" I spoke slowly. "He is someone I know. I simply didn't want him to notice that I was employed here." "Who was the woman, do you know?" Lisa's eyes glowed with rumors. "God, oh God, indeed. Catherine Morrison is that person. Everyone is familiar with her. Because of her economic success and charitable endeavors, she is frequently featured in the local press. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't get the picture of Richard kissing that woman out of my head. My fingers shaking, I reached for my laptop at midnight and opened social media, typing Catherine Morrison into the search box. Her profile appeared right away, complete with a confirmed checkmark, Richmond Technologies CEO. In the gloom of my dorm room, I read aloud to myself, Richard was employed by the same firm. He was seeing Catherine Morrison, but she wasn't just any lady. She was the director of the entire firm and his employer. There was more to his affair than that. He was having an affair with his own boss. Things worsened when I scrolled down her timeline. Much worse. Richard appeared in one picture after another. Him at business functions. At what appeared to be vacation locations, he was always standing near to Catherine, while the other staff members kept a reasonable distance. Both of them were smiling at the camera as he held the young child, who was about 3 years old. One especially upsetting picture included the message, "My two favorite men in the world. I am eager to make it official as soon as possible. Happy family engagement." As I continued to browse, the evidence grew stronger. There were pictures from years and years ago, Richard's numerous work travels. Mom was at home by herself with my brother throughout all of those occasions. He had been creating an entirely different life, replete with a second child. As I began saving the pictures one by one, my hands were trembling so much that I nearly dropped my phone. I downloaded every one of them, even the caption screenshots. Richard was there for what appeared to be the boys' birthday celebration. Christmas supper with Richard and Catherine. On a swing, Richard pushes the young youngster. I was really struck by one picture. It showed Richard, Catherine, and their kid at a fun fair around 6 months earlier. It said in the caption, "The ideal family might occasionally appear out of the blue. I am very grateful that my Prince Charming waited patiently for the ideal time to begin our family. At last, true love was meant to be. Have the patience to wait." He was not waiting. He had been telling lies, leading two very distinct lives, balancing two families like a crazy circus performer. Furthermore, it appears from Catherine's writings that she was unaware that she was the other lady. With her attractive subordinate who had captured her heart, she genuinely thought she had discovered her happily ever after. My thoughts were racing as I reclined in my chair. I didn't recognize the Richard in these pictures at all. He was grinning here, not smirks, but genuine grins. He gave me everything. He appeared to be truly delighted, hugging his hidden fiancée, playing with his secret son, and going about his secret existence. I muttered to my lonely room, "Oh, Mom. How has he affected us?" It was almost 3 a.m. when I checked the time. Sleep was the last thing on my mind, but I had an early class tomorrow. I had to make sure that all of the evidence was stored. This would have to be shown to Mom. Even though it would be detrimental to all parties, the truth had to be revealed. I was on the train, going home, a week later. My gut was in knots, and the proof was still burning a hole in my phone. I hadn't disclosed my destination to my father. I couldn't have explained to him why I had to do this. When Mom answered the door, her expression was one of genuine surprise. "We didn't expect you, Chloe." For a brief while, my younger brother's tottering around her legs seemed almost natural. Richard then emerged from behind them. He responded, Well? His voice was already beginning to take on that familiar tone of mockery. "Don't tell me you have to return home after being expelled from college due to poor marks." Mom chuckled, as if that were the most hilarious joke she had ever heard. "Stop it, Richard. Chloe is doing well at school. Is I right, honey?" I made an effort to grin. "In fact, I'm on the dean's list." "You are, of course." Richard looked me up and down and grinned. "Say that each time I see you, those jeans become bigger and bigger. Is that the current fashion trend? The loose appearance?" "Since I started college, I've truly lost weight. I'll bet my tongue." I had learnt a lot from all those cooks who were rushing around the cafe. However, Richard was always making fun of my appearance. Every time I moved during the day, the remarks persisted. Richard always had something to say when I talked. It worsened when Mom brought dinner. As I placed some mashed potatoes on my plate, he said, "Well there, Chloe. For the rest of us, save some." I continued to eat in silence while keeping a sidelong glance at him. Just last week, same man who was sitting here making fun of me had been playing happy families with his employer. Another life, another child, the same man. "Sweetheart." He turned to face his mother with a worried, inflated look. "We may need to purchase a second refrigerator if Chloe plans to visit more frequently." Mom laughed and looked at him so lovingly that my chest ached. In fact, she didn't know. With all the evidence of his treachery on it, my phone felt heavy in my pocket. Shall I show her? Observing her expression, so devoted to this man who had been deceiving her for years? I paused. Still unsure of what to do, I went upstairs to my former room after supper. However, I was halted on the steps by Richard's voice. "Where are you heading, in your opinion?" Confused, I turned around. "To my chamber." "Your space?" He chuckled. "Now that's my office. Months ago we converted it. Your mother told you, didn't she?" My brother was being bounced on Mom's hip when she came into the corridor. "Oh, I should have mentioned it. I can take a nap on the sofa." I tried to sound steady as I offered. Richard gave a headshake. "You will obstruct the path. Tonight, you'd better return to university." I glanced at my mother, hoping she would disagree and defend my suggestion of an alternative. Rather, she simply nodded. "Richard is correct, my dear. You would be better off finding another place to stay tonight." Something broke inside of me. Perhaps it was the way my mother avoided looking at me. Perhaps it was the arrogant look on Richard's face, but I'd had enough. "Why do you do this every time?" My voice trembled as I turned to face my mother. "You constantly side with him, but why? See how he treats me, don't you? How has he consistently handled me?" Mom seemed uneasy as she moved my brother to her other hip. "You're being dramatic, Chloe. Richard simply enjoys making jokes. You've been overly sensitive all along. Make jokes." I laughed resentfully. "Is that considered continual ridicule?" "The remarks on my life, my clothing, and my weight. Mom, he despises me. I've always been disliked by him. Furthermore, you have never defended me." With that uncontrollable smile remaining on his face, Richard took a step forward. "Let's not let this become another one of your adolescent outbursts, Chloe. Quit talking." I took out my phone with shaky hands. "You are no longer allowed to speak." I brought the first picture up to his face after pulling it up. It had an instant impact. His cheeks lost all of their color. "What is that?" Mom looked at the screen and inquired. "Richard, what's the matter? Do you want to tell your mother about the types of work travels you have been going on?" I go on to the next picture. His other son in the picture. Or perhaps you want to share your fiancé with her. Your boss at Richmond Technologies, you know. The one with whom you are parents. Mom's jaw dropped. I could hear the wall clock ticking since the room was so silent. That's not the case. Finally losing his smile, Richard stuttered. Not what? These pictures are not of your son. Catherine Morrison is not being kissed by you, not the 2-week-old news of your engagement. I looked at my mother. For years, he has been leading a double life. Mom. He has gone on several business travels with his other family members, his other son, and to arrange his wedding to a woman who is unaware that he is already married. You're telling lies. Mom seldom spoke above a whisper. I wish I was. With his employer, he has been unfaithful to you. Together they have a 3-year-old boy. She believes they will be married, and that he is not dating. Quit! My brother started weeping when Mom screamed. Put an end to these terrible falsehoods. You dare! You have no right to fabricate such horrible tales about Richard. I have evidence, Mom. Examine the pictures. Examine the dates. Take a look. Nothing is worth looking at. Richard has always been loathed by you. You have consistently attempted to obstruct us. He's a greater parent to your brother than your own father was to you, and that's why you're envious. Her remarks were like a blow to my head. She rushed to the front door, ripped it open, and flung my backpack onto the front yard while I stood there in disbelief. Leave now. She was in tears. Right now. Anger flushed her face. Leave our residence. I'm done listening to your falsehoods. With legs that felt like lead, I made my way to the door. Richard's smile had become even wider as I walked by him. As I went by, he leaned in close and said in a voice that only I could hear, Chloe, your mother will always trust me more than you. Keep it in mind. I was in a stupor the whole way back to college via train, my mother's comments replaying in my mind. After a restless night, the next morning, I went to Catherine Morrison's social media page after opening my laptop. Before I clicked, my cursor lingered over the message button for a considerable amount of time. I need you to know some vital facts about your fiancé, Miss Morrison. Are you open to having a face-to-face meeting? Within an hour, she responded about Richard. Naturally. Is everything all right? At the daily grind, we decided to meet. It was, oddly, her proposal. She was unaware that I was employed there, or that I had initially learnt of her presence at that particular cafe. I changed into my uniform, got to work early, and waited. Catherine Morrison entered the room at precisely 2:00 p.m. Catherine, I went up to her table. My name is Chloe. Her grin was even, pleasant, and sincere. Sit down, please. In your communication, you looked worried. What's going on here? Richard, I inhaled deeply. I want to apologize to you before I show you anything. Yes, I am. Her smile wavered. What am I sorry for? I took out my phone and went to the gallery of pictures. This is my mom. I showed her a recent family photo while I spoke. And here is Richard, her spouse, my stepfather. Catherine gazed intently at the picture. As she reached for her coffee cup, her immaculately manicured hand froze. I don't get it. My mother and him had been wed for many years. Together, they have a 2-year-old boy, my younger brother. I moved my finger to another picture. It was taken during Christmas. No, she gave a headshake. No, that isn't feasible. Richard does not have a spouse. According to him, he has never been married. In the spring, we will tie the knot. We have a son. I am aware of your son, I said softly. Richard informed you he was single, and I am aware of that. He has been leading 2 separate lives, father and husband in one city, father and fiancé in another. Her coffee grew cold as she sat in quiet for a long time. After all this time, she eventually confided to his ailing mother about all those business trips home. He was returning home to his other child, his wife. She chuckled bitterly. God, what an idiot I am. I made him regional director and gave him 3 promotions. I believed that he loved me. I apologized once again, since I had run out of things to say. Don't be. The CEO mask fell back into place as she straightened her back. I appreciate you being honest with me. I now realized that he was only taking advantage of my power and position. She got up and gathered her belongings. I have some calls to make if you don't mind. Thank you, Chloe, really. With her heels tapping on the floor, I watched her leave the cafe. She held her head high. In spite of everything, compared to my mother, she was stronger. I believed she was capable of facing reality. My phone rang a week after Catherine and I had met. It was Mom, and and she was yelling before I could even greet her. "Are you content now?" I had to keep the phone away from my ear since her voice was so loud. "Are you at last content? Everything is damaged by you." "What, Mom?" They let him go. His employer, that lady, she caused him to lose his job. They discovered infractions after auditing all of his work. He's getting thousands of dollars from them. His career is finished. Her words came in short gasps, and now she was crying. "He will never be hired again by any reputable organization, and you are solely to blame." With my legs feeling weak, I sank down on my bed in my dorm room. "He was unfaithful to you, Mom. He had a different family, a kid. He intended to wed her. You have no understanding." She interrupted me. "He's the greatest thing I've ever experienced. Your sibling deserved no better parent. You have no right to attempt to ruin that. You two were being used by him, Catherine and you. All he was doing was using everyone to his advantage. Do you not notice that? You have no right to discuss him in such a manner." Her tone became icy. "I adore this man more than anything in the world, and you have no right to condemn him. Please, Mom. I don't have a daughter." They sounded like bullets. From my perspective, you are no longer there. The cue died. I sat there looking at my phone for a long time. Tears are streaming down my face. When Jenny returned from class, she discovered me in that state. "What happened, Chloe?" "Oh my God." I told her everything. She helped me contact my father, offered me tea, and held me as I sobbed. That evening, he and Sarah came up to see how I was doing. "You made the correct decision." Sarah held my hand and continued to speak. "Even if doing the right thing might be extremely painful at times, it is still right. It has been a year since then. I continue to work at the cafe and maintain good marks at Marshall University. A little ceremony by the lake marked the marriage of Dad and Sarah. It was lovely. I was also the maid of honor for them. Sarah is expecting a child. I will shortly get a younger sibling." Through common acquaintances back home, I learn about Mom and Richard. He was never hired by another corporation. News of the audit results spread. He began drinking excessively and starting altercations at pubs. To provide for them, Mom had to work at the neighborhood store. Since they can no longer afford a babysitter as they once could, my younger brother is currently enrolled in nursery. I sometimes question if I should feel bad about not being able to sleep. Perhaps everyone would have been better off if I had remained silent. Mom would continue to enjoy her ignorance. Richard would continue to work. My brother's household would be more secure. However, I recall Richard grinning when his mother interrupted him with hushed words. "I will always be trusted by your mother more than you are." I recall all the years he spent subtly hurting me, manipulating me, and twisting everything to make me feel insignificant. No, I'm not sympathetic to them. That's the truth. Convenience and comfort aren't always important to it. It simply is. Lies were the foundation of Richard's life. And he had only himself to blame when those lies eventually came to an end.